into I'm Frasier Armitage, part-time robot, full-time nerd, and author of New Yesterday and Times Ellipse. And joining me today on a very slight delay, probably because my Wi-Fi is like still from the 80s, is an amazing author whose latest collection of dark sci-fi stories is incredible. I absolutely loved it. It's called Limelight and Other Stories. It is the incredible. How are you doing today?
I only caught about 50% of that, but I think you were just saying hello. I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing
Oh,
great. My Wi-Fi not so much, but as for me, I'm doing fantastic. No, the 50% you caught was hopefully all the good stuff because I was basically just saying how awesome you are, and that Limelight and Other Stories is amazing, and that yeah, I absolutely loved it. For everybody who's tuned in, hello. Apologies for any technical like issues that we might have, but feel free to comment in the chat and say hi and rescue me if Lyndsey can't hear me.
cool.
So, Lyndsey, tell me a little bit about Limelight and Other Stories.
Sure. So yeah, Limelight and Other Stories, it's a collection of dark science fiction stories, and it's in two parts. So it starts with near future stories, so stories that might feel a little bit closer to home, a little bit more familiar, and then far future stories, which kind of push the plausibility a little bit towards technology in the far, far future, a little bit fantastical, a little bit dystopian. And yeah, they all come together to kind of form a collection of stories that might appeal to people who like Black Mirror, Love, Death and Robots, The Twilight Zone, that kind of episodic type thing. The stories range from flash fiction all the way to novelette length. There are hologram ghosts haunting houses, dystopian bees, the future of Hollywood, technology gone wrong, cyborgs, AI with problems, all sorts of things like that.
What? Because I loved the variety, I loved reading it, I loved everything about it. Tell me a little bit about the thing that got you into writing short stories in the first place.
Yeah, sure. So I think when I first started writing, I didn't see myself as like a short story writer. So I started writing with probably novels. I mean, when I was little, I was maybe writing like shorter stories where I thought they were kind of bigger, grander stories. But I got a lot more into short fiction during lockdown. And I feel like it was like a way to focus my mind on a bit of a new writing, new world, new something in a shorter period of time. And I got really into reading short fiction a lot more as well. So I'd read a lot of short story collections before and short stories, but I'd never really tried to write them as much myself. So I decided to give a few a try and realized I really loved writing short fiction and found it like was a really good method to explore like specific concepts or themes in like a short space of time, um really delve into like weird and strange worlds, which yeah, gave me a lot, like taught me a lot about writing as well. It definitely has like improved how I work on things. And yeah, that's where this collection came from a few 4 or 5 years later.
I got I hope that that is the final part of our technical issues done, because I'm hoping that it's finally caught up and my Wi-Fi has decided to join the 21st century. I caught about like 20% of that, but what I caught was that you are a lover of short stories, you're a reader of short stories, and you decided to give them a try. and it all worked out well. And if I missed anything out from, and I ask you a question that relates to the I'm so sorry about this, Lyndsey, with the technical issues we're having. I'm hoping it clears itself up. Tell me about that the reason why you like dark sci-fi, because dark sci-fi is like the overarching like genre, I would say, of like the collection. So what was it that appeals to you about dark sci-fi?
Sure. And just to say, I hope it's not my Wi-Fi. It is a bit stormy outside, so it might be that it's not great here either. If like the stream isn't being heard on my end, I'm happy to like to do another day. But otherwise, I'll just keep answering. I did hear that question. But yeah, dark sci-fi. We were actually talking a little bit about this earlier when I was speaking to Alternative Stories with my publisher, and that kind of intersection between sci-fi and horror. And I think like part of that is I find technology, I find like adventures in space kind of scary and filled with mostly horror when I think about it. Like I read a lot of like fun science fiction as well, and I space operas and things like that, but there's always something very scary and untouchable and weird out there about the kind of future technologies and future worlds that we might end up with. And I think like asking a lot of questions about where technology is going to bring us in the future, in the near future, in the far future, brings to me always brings to mind the kind of scary things that could happen, and it's a way to explore the sort of anxieties, fears I have about those futures. So that's, I guess, where I started with a lot of the short fiction, was kind of asking questions about what if we explore this element of technology, what's going to happen. And yeah, it really kind of snowballed a bit, and I ended up writing a lot of stories about that just because it's quite fun as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the collection's dedicated to everybody that's asked what if, right? So that kind of like
Yeah.
ties in with that whole idea of, that being the thing of it. It's split into two parts, right? So near future, then far future. I'm not going to ask you which you preferred to write, but out of those two, what did you enjoy writing about the near future? And then was it a different thing that you enjoyed writing about the far future?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Yeah, I think I wrote all the stories at different times, and it was only when putting the collection together that I kind of realized that the stories I had were split into these like near future technology, far future, and the near future stuff really kind of tracked with things like Black Mirror, for example. They seemed almost too plausible in some cases. And I think what I liked about the near future things, that the ideas were that they did come from like real stories that I was reading about technology kind of gone a bit too far. I mean, I often like would take that as a seed of a story and slightly push it beyond the kind of boundaries of reality a little bit, but not too far. So it was getting that balance right of keeping it grounded within potentially realistic realms of reality in the future. And I quite enjoyed thinking about that, and what sort of worlds and characters would end up there. And yeah, then with the far future, I guess I gave myself a bit more creative freedom to play with genre a bit more. I introduced some fantastical elements that you can kind of do when you go into like space travel and wormholes and things like that. And I even brought in a bit of magic into one of the stories just because I had an idea for cyborg magic witches. So there is a little bit of like genre playing about in the far future sections, which kind of push them beyond the sort of realms of possibility. But hopefully there's still something in the kind of far future stories that track with the real world today, kind of technology encroaching on life, worries about the future, that sort of dystopian futures that we might have. But yeah, slightly more far-fetched potentially.
Yeah, and I feel like it really is like, it's when we're talking about far future, we're not talking about massive leaps for the reader into sort of, a future that people can't imagine. It's really
Yeah.
amazing how you've rooted it all in sort of like, what we're experiencing now. I was really intrigued by why Limelight was the story that you decided to opt for as like the feature story, the title and everything. What was it about that story that made it so special that it made the cover?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. The real reason probably, I mean, it comes around to more than this, but the initial reason was so I did a novelette, Have You Decided on Your Question, with my publisher, Shortwave Publishing, back last year, and it was kind of a short novelette, about 14,000 words. And we put that out, and it was a really really great process, fun. Hopefully it seems to have gone down well. And that's what kind of I was working with Shortwave on a story of that length, and I was thinking about, I ended up writing one that was about the same length, which was Limelight ultimately. And I approached Alan and kind of pitched that as the idea, but then when we were chatting a bit more about it as a project and whether we might want to take something to a next level, the idea of putting a collection together came together. And I kind of got a bit out of hand and like started piecing together the stories, and then went to him with the collection pretty soon after, and realized there was quite a lot of like interconnecting themes with Limelight in particular. And yeah, part of the reason was that. But I also think there's like a lot of themes in the book that overlap with that sort of being in the limelight, the technology kind of improving, self-improvement, and the idea of technology enhancing the way we live. And that's ultimately what like putting us in the limelight, putting the technology in the limelight, putting ourselves in the limelight kind of came from. And that's very much what the story Limelight is about, from a slightly dystopian lens. But yeah, it ended up feeling right for the collection itself. And yeah, and then Alan came up with an amazing cover for it, which, I can show you. Here it is here. And it's very cool.
We got mine here too.
You've got it there as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's where it works very well in a cover. So it's very handy that I went with that title in particular. But yeah.
Awesome stuff. Sean has joined us, and Sean says hi. He says that he's going to start Limelight tonight, so it's perfect timing for the stream to get him hyped to read it. So
nice.
Sean,
Hi, Sean.
yeah, great to have you here with us, Sean, but you will not regret starting it. It is absolutely fantastic.
Well, you might when you find out how bleak it is, but hopefully it'll win you over.
No, I feel like there's a lot of themes that resonate in Limelight, the story itself, that, like you say, track across the whole collection. Like that whole idea of, identity and what makes us who we are, and do we risk losing that the further into the future we progress, and all this kind of stuff, and our relationship with technology. I kind of felt like Better Self and Uncensored and Limelight all together kind of would make a perfect little world for you to like write in. Is there any kind of ideas of you kind of going back to the worlds of these stories and maybe expanding on that in future stories?
Yeah, I mean, not yet, but it's definitely something I've thought about. And honestly, like, it's funny you pick those out, because Better Self and Uncensored have those connections of the same company. So I did imagine those two in the same world. And we put together a bit of like merchandise actually for the launch and for going out with Shortwave pre-orders, which is like a futuristic ad pamphlet with Limelight Monthly and all the technology that you would find. And that kind of got me thinking about, there would be a world where you could bring in some of these technologies. So it would be quite fun at some point to revisit bringing in some of those technologies like subtly into a novel project at some point. So I'll never say never. It's not something I've got like cemented in my mind, but there's definitely some stories where I feel like have some particular connections there. You could see them happening in the same city or the same place in the future, not probably around about the same time period, so yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, well, you can put it on like my wish list of things that I would love to read, because I would love to read more about these worlds. I think they're fascinating. One of the things that is a real highlight of the collection is how emotionally invested that you get to the stories, even though they're bite-sized. They give you a real sort of like mouthful to chew on. How did you do that? How did you learn to write in such a compellingly emotive way?
I'm going to be that really annoying author and say I'm not really aware I'm necessarily doing it when I'm writing the stories. It's something someone said to me before, and I think part of it is, for me, when a story idea comes into my head, I need a really clear character in my head. So I very often start with a character. And it's often a character in a snippet of a world, and who they are, and figuring out who they are is generally how I start out most of my ideas. And sometimes I have a concept, but usually I can't start the story until I know who the story is about. So I very much like get to know that character, figure out how it's going to end for them. That's also something I tend to not be able to write until I know roughly where the story's going, roughly how it's going to end. So I've got the character at the start, I've got the end point. And I think because I know those two things and I start to get to know the character very well, it probably leads to having that kind of more character emotional arc throughout. But yeah, it's not something I necessarily intentionally set out to do all the time. But it seems to work well. And I definitely think like a lot of the stories I read, and books I read, I really love like character led and character oriented kind of storytelling. And so that's where I've always kind of gone to with my writing as well.
That's awesome. It's funny you mentioning about characters because I really wanted to talk to you about your characters, because the lens through which you write a lot of the stories is kind of like the lens of the common people, not sort of the elite of society. Is there something about sort of these characters being just ordinary folk in these future worlds that really sort of tickles your imagination? Like sort of it's impels you to write their stories almost.
Yeah, I'm trying to think again about all this about the different stories and characters. I think I just kind of often take a character in an everyday setting, and often from maybe experiences I know, or like kind of based on realities that I'll maybe know. So that probably comes in a little bit. And I guess also maybe subconsciously, but you know, the way technology um, feeds into our everyday life, it tends to affect disproportionately, like just the ordinary person who's just going about their life and having all this technology thrown at them. And it's being driven top down almost. That's the kind of power systems that exist. So I think it'd be hard sometimes to write uh, as kind of a maybe in like an emotionally impactful story in a different way. But yeah, I get again, it wasn't something I consciously was doing, but I can appreciate that's kind of the pattern that's come out of it. And just like everyday people going about their lives and experiencing these kind of random technology things and going on, or things going wrong, or dealing with their own kind of personal stresses and anxieties through that lens.
Yeah, that's really cool. When you were putting together this collection and gathering the bits of different stories that you've written over time, because there's a list in the back of where a lot of these
Yeah.
stories have been appeared before. When you were, I mean, there's new ones in there as well, which is great. But did it surprise you that when you looked across all these stories that they had so much in common with one another?
Yeah, I think it was nice to like draw the connections between them. And I also, when I was putting together collections, I also had cut quite a few stories because they didn't have those common themes. So there were a few that maybe didn't quite lean into the sci-fi enough, or didn't quite lean into that technology conversation. And then a few more that were a bit too like out there in terms of this collection, not grounded enough. So there definitely was a process of like culling some stories from it. And to try and make it as cohesive as possible. And it's interesting that, you know, I put this together in this because I've got another collection coming out next year, which was actually just the way publishing works. That one was put together before this one, so this was the second one I put together. It just happens to be coming out before. But with that one, it was a slightly different process in that I kind of realized it's based on Scottish folklore stories. So I realized that I had quite a few based on the characters, creatures, um, ghosts, things like that from folklore. And I pulled those together and I realized that I could make a collection if I kept writing those sorts of stories. And they were very seasonal and seasonally linked. And I realized there was quite a lot of gaps with that collection. And I ended up writing quite a few new stories to build that collection up. Whereas I found when I was putting together this one, things pieced together in a slightly kind of different way, not necessarily easier, but in a way that kind of meant that I was able to play about a bit more with structure, and I didn't have to write, like I wrote 1 or 2 new stories, I think, for this collection, and the others were kind of unpublished and ready to go into it. And Limelight, of course, was the kind of anchor story that I was looking to put it, and that's an exclusive story to the collection. So yeah, it was just kind of piecing together like a jigsaw, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know that you write in so many different other types of genre, like with the Scottish folklore and dark fantasy and all this kind of stuff. And it was really surprising to me that you followed up the "Have you decided on your question?" and that now you've got another sort of dark sci-fi, technologically sort of based book. How do these stories kind of compare to a lot of the other stories that you enjoy writing and a lot of the other things? I mean, is it going to be a easy transition for your readers to go from this collection to your next one, or is it going to be a little bit like two different wheelhouses, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about this earlier today as well, actually. I think it's something that comes up because I do write in those different genres, particularly with my short fiction. And I think it's just because I love playing about with all those genres. I suppose with the Scottish folklore collection next year, the thing that they all have in common is that they're all dark interpretations of things. So the one next year is still kind of in the horror, dark fantasy realm. And some of the stories in there are speculative as well. But generally, and again, the thing that they have in common probably is that kind of character, human lens of a story. Like they're pretty, they've got the kind of emotional arc at the center. There's stories about families, relationships, romances. They've got all that kind of stuff in it that this collection, Limelight, has as well. But certainly, yeah, if it might be a slightly different genre to try out. I hope some people will have similar common interests. Like, I love going between horror, sci-fi, gothic, folklore, fantasy, just kind of read very widely. I know some people, if they're kind of more stuck to one genre, that's fine. They might not end up reading the other one. But yes, we all have this different tastes, but they hopefully have some things in common. And my writing style, I'm sure, is similar, probably.
Yeah, and I feel like there's enough like traces of that in some of the stories in the far future that anybody who
Yeah.
enjoys that aspect is really going to enjoy the next stuff. I think it's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about the length of some of these stories because some of them are just, like you say, flash fiction. Flash fiction is something I really struggle to write because, in case you sort of didn't realize yet, I enjoy waffling. It's like one of the only things I do well. So my stories tend to come on the longer side. What is it about flash fiction that is really appealing to you as a writer, and how did you craft the skills to be able to do it really well?
Yeah. Firstly, I just want to say, like, I read Time's Ellipse, your book last week, and it's brilliant. But some of those sections are like vignettes, which are like flash fiction. So I feel like you were able to get like very short character studies in throughout the book, which I loved. So yeah, you're doing yourself an injustice there. But yeah, flash fiction, it's interesting. Again, like it wasn't something I knew I enjoyed until I started writing stories. And I think one of the things that got me into it actually was Apex Magazine were running like a microfiction contest every month. It started out, I think, during lockdown, and it's something that I used to get me writing. And it started off being like a 250 word limit, and you got like a prompt and you had to write something to it. And that got me in the habit of like trying to fit a story and an arc in such a short like episodic story, I guess. And I really enjoyed the challenge of it and like just having to think about what was important for that story. So usually it was something, a very short period of time, character study in a particular setting, but you needed to also try and get some sort of emotional arc in there from A to B, right? Apex then kind of changed to be like maximum 1,000 words. And yeah, some of the stories that I entered into that competition, actually quite a few of them are in the collection. One of them, A Ring Around, one after I submitted, I think, like 30 times to Apex, and they expected my story a ring around. So yeah, don't give up if you're submitting to magazines. I just kept sending them stuff until I got that yes. And yeah, I think it was just through practice and trying to force myself to like write a very short story every month, see what worked. I was reading a lot of flash fiction as well, so really just kind of learning what I think some flash fiction authors are really amazing at doing that kind of very quick, impactful, emotive stories. And I just enjoy the challenge of it. And yeah, although it has sometimes made it harder for me to write long fiction because I kind of end up being too brief in what I'm writing and then have to go back and think, no, I have to expand this out a little bit. It's a slightly different mode of writing when you're doing flash. And I haven't actually written many flashes in the last few months, probably because I've been working on a novel. So the brain works in a slightly different way. Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. You've got to. It's a very, very different thing, isn't it? It's short and flash and novels. Thank you
Yeah.
for the kind words about Times Ellipse, Lyndsey. Fun fact: I first tried to write that as a flash fiction story, and that's how long it ended up. That's how bad I am at writing flash fiction. But yeah, I love what you say about setting yourself a challenge and setting yourself a goal of just exploring it and trying it, because it's such a, I think flash fiction is one of those things that every writer thinks, oh yeah, I'll give it a go, and then quickly realizes, oh no, this is a lot harder than it looks. And it's, yeah, I love that idea of just setting yourself that challenge to improve and to get better. Have you found that as you've been looking back through some of your older stories that you read them and you've noticed the improvement in your writing and the progress that you've made?
Yeah, definitely. I think like I read some of the stories that never made it, and occasionally like they pop up, ones that weren't ever accepted that kind of shelved. I maybe liked the concept and ideas of them, but yeah, I definitely have learned the craft over the years, and a part of that has been just very lots of practice, lots of reading, lots of other short fiction and seeing what works, and taking courses and getting doing crit groups and getting feedback from people that I know also write short fiction. So it definitely has been a bit of a craft and a journey. There's definitely stories sitting there that I don't think I'll ever want to release to the public unless I do some like significant work to them. But even with some of the ones that were published, I would look back and think, I could have written that differently now. But in some ways, they're all part of that like journey, right? So you don't want to say, I wouldn't want to publish this now because it was the story that I was writing a few years ago where I was maybe in a slightly different headspace. I was maybe like, thinking about other issues and topics. And sometimes I think some of the writing I did like a few years back was like more imaginative because I wasn't thinking about all the other stuff that I have to, like, I seem to be thinking about now. My head is full of all the other things that come with writing and craft, and sometimes that can be a writing block as well. Whereas I think when I was kind of early on trying new stories, I wasn't held back by like the worry of rejection and failure that I now have, which sounds like I've gone backwards, but I think it's just through like learning more about the industry and learning more about magazines and short fiction and how that all works. It's just there's so many factors at play, and once you know all about that, it becomes a bit more intimidating somehow than when I was just setting out sending stuff out.
Yeah, I think there's something really nice about sort of a naivety about the industry, because you feel like what you're writing is so, unaffected by anything other than the passion you're putting into it.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
but there is that thing of once you know something, you can't unknow it. So it's seeing that and seeing the trends and seeing how it works but it's a big advantage because it means that you've been published, and it means that you've got this collection coming out, and we get to read the stories that you've written.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's great. I want to just delve a little bit into something that you mentioned earlier, because you brought up the comparisons between sort of Black Mirror and Love, Death and Robots and that kind of thing. When people make those kinds of comparisons, how do you feel about it? Do you think like, oh yeah, this is fantastic, or do you think, oh, I wish it was being compared to this instead, or what's it like when you hear that kind of feedback?
Yeah, it's so funny. I think you and Chris must be on the same wavelength because we also talked about this earlier this afternoon. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think part of it is I love those things, and I don't like when people compare two things that I love, I'm kind of a bit like, oh no, it's not as good as that, or not as incisive as that. So I take it as a big compliment to like see those comparisons, and I have started using that as part of the, I guess, like marketing appeal, because people have said, you know, Black Mirror-esque or kind of Twilight Zone or Love, Death and Robots, those kind of like episodic type stories. And I think part of that comparison probably comes from these are very character oriented stories, not focused as much on the technology as the kind of human impact of the story itself. So yeah, I definitely see it as a compliment. I wouldn't be worried if people said that. Yeah, and I guess it's interesting because they are short stories. There's maybe like not a single novel that you would compare it to, apart from like obviously I've read lots of other collections, and I love reading collections. But in terms of like finding comparisons to like specific novels, there's so many different stories in there. It's quite hard to do that. So it's easier maybe to do it to like an episodic series, because a collection, I guess, feels like a series of stories, right? And almost the same way as like a TV show might be. Yeah, so definitely kind of cool to get those comparisons.
Do you think it would make an amazing TV show?
Oh, I would love that. I don't know. I mean, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? It's kind of every writer's dream to see something like that adapted. And I think some of them in particular, some of the stories in there, because like they are near future, they hopefully wouldn't be like a huge budget to like adapt compared to some of the more far future ones, which I can imagine would probably be a lot harder to do. So yeah, you never know. There could be some cool potential for some of the stories. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would make an awesome series. I think it would be great. Sean has mentioned about the publisher, about Shortwave. He thinks that they've got to be one of the best publishers in the game right now, indie or otherwise. What's been your experience with Shortwave, just from that side of things, of dealing with them as a publisher? Have you seen from the writer's side as well that they know what they're doing and they treat you really well? And
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm always raving about them to other writers. So yeah, it's Alan Lastufka from Shortwave who runs the whole thing. So it's very much that kind of one-on-one. We talk about everything. We talk through. It's a really nice experience as an author to kind of have so much like upfrontness and communication, and we talk a lot about stuff. I probably email him too much, sorry Alan, with questions and things. So it's really nice from that perspective. And yeah, they're putting out like amazing books. I haven't read all of their books yet because I can't keep up with their output because it's amazing. But everyone that I have read has been excellent, and definitely recommend checking those ones out. I think their Killer VHS series in particular has got like quite a lot of hype around it because it has such cool like concept marketing design, that kind of thing. So I definitely check those out when they come out. And yeah, just very much the authors are doing exciting things as well, like sometimes quite experimental works, sometimes like more pulpy horror. You really get a kind of good taste of things. And of course the design really is something that like stands out as well. I think Alan would say himself, because he has that background in graphic design, that's, you know, visually is something that's really important. I think that definitely catches the eye, and that's what you want as an author as well, is to know that your product and your book at the end of the day is going to catch people's eyes, hopefully, and people will want to check it out, because people do judge books by their cover. So yeah, it's been a great experience. I only have good things to say.
that's awesome. It's so nice to hear. And Adam has given us a wave. Hi, Adam. Great to have you with us. Good to see you. Let me, because I think that there's a lot of, it's like you've mentioned about technology. You know, we're having this conversation because of technology. So there's really good things that have come from it. Maybe not at the start, because at the start, my Wi-Fi was, thank you for being a pro and totally powering through as well,
Okay.
Lyndsey.
Well, we're smooth now. It's all good.
But yeah, it's all good. It's all good. I think it's when you said we could do it another time, my computer was like, no, I must behave now. But no,
yeah.
But the thing with technology is that there is this sort of like dual-edged sword, isn't there? That there's also cons to technology, and there's this brilliant sense of dread that you're able to cultivate through so many of the stories. And I was wondering, do you find that writing stories in the near future, or just in the future in general, is it easier to cultivate that sense of dread rather than writing stories that are based sort of in the contemporary, in the now?
Yeah, I think what doing slightly further in the future, it's a little bit more escapist because I don't actually have to write about like horrible things happening now, which is also a privilege to be able to do. But it's that it gives you the chance to kind of delve a bit more deeply into those fears and anxieties and worries about that kind of encroachment of tech in our life. And I kind of mostly approach stories, and certainly the near future ones, from a kind of plausible reality, and then kind of maximize it to like a little bit further or a wee bit further in future, and think about what that would look like if the technology was able to do what you can foreseeably see it might be able to do in 10, 15 years time, 50 years time, I'm not sure. But yeah, and some of them have also been like inspired by like real life stories I've seen in newspapers and social media, things popping up. Like, yeah, news stories that show that these things are plausible. I think one of them actually like really has always stuck with me, and it's like a really depressing look at like the current reality. And I think you'll have noticed probably like some of the stories kind of engage with like, I guess, like celebrity and influencer culture and technology and things like that. So there's a few stories in there. Like there's one which sounds very controversial, a story called Rent a Baby, which was very much inspired. It's a flash fiction, and it's basically just very on the nose satire, and it's one of the shorter pieces in the collection. But it came from like a story that I saw about an influencer couple who were going to adopt a baby. And then they went online. I can't remember the exact details of it, but they went online and they posted a video basically saying they decided to not adopt the baby because they wouldn't be allowed to post about the baby for a year. And that didn't fit their influencer aesthetic. And that story like really stuck out to me as extremely dystopian, and just like the idea of an influencer couple wanting to adopt a baby purely as part of their like influencer identity. And that just made me kind of really worried and stressed about that side of thing. And I wrote that really silly story as a result. But I think what the kind of slightly detached version of the story kind of allows me to do is sort of point at the ridiculousness of some of it as well. Hopefully. So yeah, I definitely take like it's more escapist partly to write about it, but it also allows you to kind of delve in a bit in a slightly different way than just writing about right now.
Totally. I loved Rent a Baby. It's the full title is Rent a Baby TM Content Without Commitment. I thought
Yeah.
it's so cool. Yeah, that whole it's almost like structured like an advert, isn't it? And I just thought there's so much in there. But it gives you like a real like it leaves you with that feeling of like, oh yeah, this is so plausible. That it's kind of scary in a way. It's kind of almost like reading horror. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's this fun little advert that you've thrown in. It was great. I mean, in terms of like the future of technology for you as a writer, how do you think it's going to shape sort of your career as a writer? Because obviously, as technology progresses, we get more tools, some good, some bad. How do you think it's going to influence you and your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it doesn't have too much impact. I think it might change how we like, I think technology already is changing how we consume stories and like attention spans. I mean, I certainly have felt that with like I think there's definitely like addiction to social media and things like that, which are impacting attention span and ability to take on stories. And I've had to give myself some bans recently because I'm just spending too much time and I'm not doing enough productive stuff. And I'm sure that is something that people can relate to. Hopefully it's not just me. So there's that like encroaching on our lives, I guess. And also just the need, I think the way technology is and the way social media is, there's like a pressure to be online, to be kind of present and to present self yourself in a certain way. And then you've got social media going crazy with certain billionaires taking over and things like that. And I also have those kind of worries about AI and how that's encroaching in writers and creative and artist spaces. And again, it was something we were talking about earlier, but that kind of the ethical, just because we can develop something doesn't mean we should. And how do we ensure that we keep this sort of creative art as something that's really valued? And I think we're going down a slightly dangerous route where there is a sort of devaluing of creative and art practices, and that worries me. There's also just like funding is being slashed everywhere for creative practices, certainly in the UK, and that also kind of devalues the kind of contribution that can make to society in the way like fiction and art can engage with social issues and things like that. So I think and it's also, the more that gets cut, the less people can access those careers. And that does, I worry about that a lot, I think. But I hope for, the writing community overall, I think like the majority are maybe I'm in an echo chamber and that's what I'm hearing, but are very kind of pushing back against AI. And I hope that movement kind of builds enough and they can get some contract protection things, and that people start to see that, it's got a bit of a buzz and people have gotten a bit carried away, but it's actually not delivering the kind of interesting things that they think it is. And things will quieten down a bit as like some fads. It's just going to be a fad, hopefully. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope you're being right, Lyndsey. I hope that would be great. That would be I kind of, it's one of those things of, like you say, about the consumption of media. And this is why I think, short stories are so great, because, people can just dip in and out. And having sort of crafted that talent, I think that's going to be something that is really, really good for the future. I think getting that sort of anthology style TV series style feel into a book is very much how people are consuming things these days, aren't they? One of the things that I was really intrigued by is technology. You would think it's there to benefit our health, but so many of the stories have different twists on technology that is connected to our health, but it isn't always beneficial, like Better Self, or like Limelight, even in some ways like Hush Little Sister. What's your view on that with regard to sort of this sense of some of the issues that we have and some of the issues that make us who we are, in a way that connect with our identity? What's the role of technology, do you think, in with regard to those particular issues? Because it seems like from your stories, it's kind of, you were a little bit worried about that.
Yeah, I think with some of those stories, actually, they maybe stemmed from me being worried about those themes more generally, and like the stuff around healthcare, like Better Self and Uncensored, and Limelight to an extent. I think it's like it's more a fear of society's encroachment on like bodily autonomy, on our freedom rights, that sort of thing. And quick fixes being sold are never really quick fixes, and I'd be dubious of that. I mean, to be honest, like Better Self and Uncensored, those ones, for example, came from like, those were very like kind of personal stories, like came from like personal experiences of like, going to having like not the best experiences with like going to healthcare and dealing with that as a woman, like trying to get treatment for things or trying to get seen about stuff and just being prescribed one thing after the other, which is where like Uncensored came from. And then Better Self kind of comes from that as well. It was really weird. I was writing Better Self. It's kind of, just for background for those who haven't read the collection, it's basically a story about a woman who's working for she's working in a call center company. She's had this retinad installed, so they're constantly playing ads in her retina when she's not in work mode. So and in order to get rid of those, you have to pay to get rid of those, and she's not able to do that. But then she's offered. She basically keeps getting all these like adverts that say better self, like weight loss, all about this kind of toxic diet culture stuff. And eventually she gives in because they offer her like a free trial to get rid of the retin ads for a while if she takes part in like a trial of this medication. And it doesn't go well. But I was writing that story and I was on Instagram again, like scrolling like just mindlessly, and an advert for something called Better Me came up, and it's an actual like weight loss like service ad that obviously costs a lot of money. And it was just really weird like juxtaposition there between like real life stress and anxiety about stuff and then writing about it, and and then kind of the way that comes together. I've kind of lost track of your original question. Sorry. I just started rambling.
I love your rambles, Lyndsey. Keep going, keep going. No, it was.
The encroachment of identity and bodily
because
autonomy and things like that. Yeah.
I feel like I connected with so many of those stories. I think because of, anybody who's had any kind of interaction with health and, that kind of thing with the medical profession, you kind of, you see how you've explored so many of those different things in so many clever kinds of ways, and you've kind of veiled it in this whole thing of, let's it is technology really making us better, or is it actually, and I feel like that is it's a really profound and a really, really deep thing to have done in what is also like quite an entertaining story. So I would say top marks basically. But I sensed that like you as a writer had a lot of things that you wanted to express in those stories, so I thought it was worth an ask.
I think like just to add, I guess like the more we rely on technology to fix our problems, the more detached we come from them, because you don't have, I think like some things, the more we remove humanity from our day-to-day, then the more like machines we become, or the more we open up, room for error necessarily. Maybe that's a very bleak view of it, but it's something I definitely worry about, is that the more we rely on technology. In some ways technology also, I mean, to balance it, we're obviously here talking, we wouldn't have been able to do that without this sort of technology. And there is things that I'm like not anti-technology as a concept or anything, and there's a lot of interesting things happening, and there is a lot of interesting technology happening in healthcare and medicine that could really improve people's lives. So I'm definitely not like anti that. I think I'm definitely trying to challenge the if we can, should we kind of mentality of like the ethical considerations of particular things. And
the societal acceptance of technology as being a blanket good thing, it's kind of, and just saying, right, there's an app for that, is that necessarily a good thing or not? It's like it's that kind of thing. And I love that you've achieved that in the collection without it being over the top, or without it feeling like you're on a platform for this, or you're standing behind a podium. You just get all these different flavors from it that get you thinking about the world and get you thinking about technology, and it's really, really good. It's awesome. I really hope that it wasn't in some ways. I hope that it wasn't me that was glitching earlier, because all I had to say was lovely things about it, which you'll admit. But Adam says retinad, so this is horror. All I would say, Adam, to that, tell me if you agree with this, Lyndsey. There is a very blurred line between sci-fi and horror in the collection, and dark sci-fi really is very dark here. So would you agree with it? Would you think that that's
I think so. And as I said before, like sci-fi, like because it scares me, I naturally went down the very horror route, and some of the stories very much lean into horror tropes as well, particularly in the far future side of things. I think you actually get ghosts in some stories. I mean, Hush Little Sister I've described as like a haunted house with technology kind of story. Although it's kind of a happy story. I don't know. Maybe I'm confused about that. I think it's kind of a happy story.
It's like a cozy horror. Is that what it is?
Yeah, cozy horror. Let's go with that. And so there's ghosts. There's like body horror in this far future section. So there's definitely quite a lot of like horror tropes in there. The first section is probably more like blurring that lines between sci-fi and horror, but with quite scary outcomes, I suppose.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you, as well with horror stories, I think you get that sense of, you put it down and you think like that. Quite a lot of the stories end in that kind of way, where it just makes you just immediately want to like read more. So you just go to the next one, and then you get the same kind of feeling. You get to the end, and you're like, oh, what? It's like, and I feel like you've done that really well with putting them together in that way. It's just, I mean, I read it in like 2 sittings. I just couldn't put it down. I thought it was brilliant.
Thank
Um,
you.
but yeah, but I definitely sense that there's a big horror sort of. I feel like that's kind of the thing that maybe links all of your stories in a way. Is that underneath?
Yeah, mostly.
Have you decided on your question? Is the novelette that came before this?
Yeah.
It kind of links perfectly in with the collection.
Yeah.
Is it strange to have had something that you've done really well and it's been absolutely great and really well received and all of that kind of thing, and then you write something that's similar and it is also really well received and it's done really well and all that kind of thing? Because I guess a lot of people, when they do their follow-up hits, if it's too similar to the first thing, people get a bit but with you've kind of smashed it out the park again. So what's that, how does that feel like, to have had 2 things that are similar but to have been received just as well as each other?
Well, I feel like Limelight's a bit yet to be seen how it's received. But yeah, I mean, so far there's been some really lovely reviews. And I think what's been really nice is it's definitely found its readership in the people I think who've read it so far. And probably because of that, it's people who have read How You Decided on Your Question, probably they're finding Limelight and Other Stories, partly because of the publisher connection, partly because I think through indie publishing and the reading community and writing community and that kind of space tend to kind of connect up in certain ways, and the readership that I'm getting is probably going to be similar to the novelette. But yeah, I think the novelette was probably like a nice taster for this collection. Hopefully it like explores slightly as well similar themes but in a slightly different way. It probably could have fit quite nicely into this collection if it was like done at the same time, you know. So yeah, and it was really nice to see that being nicely received and things. And yeah, especially for such a like a short piece. And I think Shortwave are like great in that they took that kind of risk on publishing a novelette as an actual like paperback book that I could have, and it was like a really exciting thing last year because that was the first thing that I'd had that was a single author thing published before, and then I'm publishing my first collection with them, so it's a very nice like through flow there. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I hope that reception continues from like the few reviews that we've had so far. I think collection's a hard one because there aren't many like people who would say they're collection readers. They like will read particular genres and maybe pick up the odd collection. I mean, I read a lot of collections and short fiction because I love, as you say, that kind of episodic, going from story to story and getting a sense of the author's style, and then picking up their other works in future. But it's certainly not the kind of thing that's going to hit the bestseller list like a collection or that kind of thing. So I think just if it's finding its readers of short story lovers and things like that, I'll be happy.
I mean, you got to be happy with the blurbs for it, right? I mean,
yeah,
Aaliyah Whiteley says delicately written and emotionally wrenching. I mean, that's just
yes, I know.
perfect. And then Catherine McCarthy, this is sci-fi with soul. Everyone should read it. You had like Ed Crocker from FanFiAddict, our very own Ed, giving it 10 out of 10 yesterday.
Very kind
like,
of them. Yeah.
It's you saying about reaching its readers, it's the people who love this really love it. So I think you smashed it, and I'm one of those people, Lyndsey. I think it's
thank you.
And I just hope that all of the readers who enjoy that kind of fiction do come across it, because it's just it's such a worthwhile collection to read. It's amazing. So all the best with it. And what will you be writing next? So you've got your collection from Luna Press next year, but what's next in the drafting phase for you?
Yeah, well, I have a couple of novels that are like out they're hoping to find publishers for eventually. But the one I'm writing at the moment, I feel like I was saying earlier that I was going to finish it by the end of the month, but I have said that for like 6 months, and it's been, I think it's maybe a little bit of like just life and burnout and things. This novel's been a bit slower, but it's also been one of the novels that's been like the most challenging things I've written. It's required a lot of research. So I'm writing like a deep sea horror thriller in the near future. So it's quite near future in that I definitely have to do my research to make sure that it's relatively plausible. And it's kind of a scientist who is going down on a deep sea research submersible. Things are weird. She finds out just before she goes that she's going to be arrested for causing an environmental disaster. And she doesn't tell the rest of her crew because she just wants one final, expedition without having to worry about being arrested. But then they crash, and they're rescued by like a deep sea station that isn't supposed to be there. And she has to go with her crew to the station where weird things are afoot, including strange jellyfish and eco-conspiracy, and it kind of flashes back and forward in different timelines. So yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment. It's like 70,000 words done, so it's very close, but I seem to just have like a block getting over the finish line. Like I know how it's going to end. I just need to like sit down and write it. So that's what I'm doing. Just various life things over the last few months. Things have been a bit busy, but I keep saying next month will be quieter, but actually this month should be quieter, so I should be able to get on with working through that. And yeah, most of my novel projects, the longer projects, are in the sci-fi horror space as well. For now, anyway. I'm sure I'll have a whim and that will change at some point. But yeah, that's what I'm working on.
It sounds amazing, Lyndsey. I can't wait to read it. One of I guess my last question to you, apart from sort of asking about how people can contact you in socials and things, is how does someone so lovely and so nice come up with such dark, awful things that they write about? It's like you have this wonderful, lovely conversation, and it's like, what are your stories about? Things that will frighten you at night. It's like do you know why have you figured out why your imagination keeps giving you these stories and not like the lovely sort of cozy romances, or is it just a mystery that you enjoy?
I don't know, maybe I'm like secretly dark at heart. No, I think I think part of it is like horror as a genre and like dark stories are like a really good way to process stuff and things going on. So they're definitely part of that for me. And I love reading really dark. Like I've always loved reading dark stories from when I was younger, reading dark fairy tales and things like that. But like that's something I've always been very drawn to. Gothic books, that kind of thing. So it's definitely something I've enjoyed. But yeah, I get asked. I mean, my mom asks me this constantly. So, like, just write something nice for a change. She reads she's read all my stuff, and like, it's very nice. And yeah, keeps copies of my stories on a shelf and tells people to read it. So yeah, no, it's fine. But yes, I do get this. Yeah, it's nice to hear that I don't come across as a horrible, like, horrifying. Writer, but honestly, in the horror community, the horror writers and people that I meet are like the loveliest people. So I think there's something to be said about that. I'm not quite sure exactly, but yeah, everyone I meet who writes horror is lovely. So
it's this weird trend that like the loveliest people write the most like awful stories. Like it's yeah, not awful as in like bad to read, but just awful as in they play with your head and they really get you, It's like,
it's like letting our alter ego out to like explore.
Yeah, but just keep doing it because I think it's amazing. But yeah, just congratulations on writing something that is so authentically brilliant and just so switched on in so many different ways. I absolutely love it, Lyndsey, and everybody who reads it, I really hope that they feel the same. Sean, just before we go, let's check in with Sean, who says that technology in deep water are his two biggest fears, so he can't wait. And then Kat, hi Kat.
Oh, hi,
She says,
Kat.
what wonderful chat. Thanks both. Looking forward to your next project, Lyndsey, which we all are. But yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for being here with us, Kat, and for joining in. And yeah, it's great to see you. Lyndsey, for everybody who's enjoyed our chat, how can they get in touch with you? How can they keep in touch online, and the socials that you're addicted to? How can they how can they reach you?
Yeah, so I'm on most of the socials. Most of my socials are just like my full name, Lyndsey Croal. So Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads, those things that I'm trying out, like new stuff. And I'm on X, Twitter as writer Linds. My website is just lyndseycroal.co.uk, and I have a newsletter as well called Literally Lyndsey, which is a tongue twister. And I theoretically it's monthly, but it's lately slipped a bit. It's every couple months, but I also post there like, you know, folklore facts and submission calls and things. So if you want to keep up to date on my stuff, that's probably the best place, is the newsletter, to find that. But yeah, I'm on all the socials as well. So yeah, keep in touch.
Confirm it's an excellent newsletter, and yeah, it's very good.
And my Twitter is mostly cat pictures now, so you know, we're getting that as well.
Bonus, yeah, totally. I'm surprised the cat hasn't visited us on our little.
Oh, he's in the other room.
But yeah, it's been so lovely to catch up with you, Lyndsey. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, apologies to everybody for the technological hiccups at the start, but hopefully it was worth it by the end.
We worked it out.
And yeah, all the best with this, Lyndsey. And everybody go get a copy.
And everyone buy Times Ellipse, another of Frasier's book. They're amazing.
Thanks, Lyndsey.
Nice to chat.
Take care. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.